I'm so happy to be here and so happy to see you all, and just want to introduce our esteemed panel. Tonight, joining us to discuss reparations, we have Jean-Pierre Brutus from the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. He's the senior counsel there. We also have that's you, Mayor Sean Spiller, the mayor of Montclair, and we have Reverend Anya Sammler-Michael, who is the Reverend of the Unitarian-Universalist congregation at Montclair. So thank you all for coming out to discuss this really important topic. And to get us started, why doesn't everybody just take a few minutes to tell us how you came to be interested in this topic and to do this work?
Sure, so I'll begin. Can you all hear me? Yes. So it's a pleasure this evening to be here. I just want to say thank you to the Montclair Public Library, and thank you to you all for coming out here on Valentine's Day. Showing your love for reparations.
There you go.
So first, how I got here. It's a big question. I think there are multiple ways where I could start, right? And there are multiple beginnings. But one of the places I would start is with just at home. You know, it's impossible for me to have not lived in the household I lived in, to be a child of immigrants from Haiti and not hear about the Haitian Revolution and the impact it had on the Atlantic world and the role that Haiti played in ending Atlantic slavery. And that played a role in shaping my views about social justice and race. And I went to college and studied African American studies and sociology. And as a research assistant at Harlem Hospital, I thought more and more critically about social conditions and the structural nature of racism. So I decided to pursue those studies further in graduate school. And I wanted to help and impact people, so I decided I also wanted to become a practicing attorney. So I represented people facing eviction in the Bronx. And I thought about the reasons why my clients were facing those situations, the structural nature of those conditions. And I wanted to do policy work, thinking about the relationship between history and the present. And the Institute was doing wonderful, cutting-edge work. And Ryan Haygood is really hard to turn down, so when I spoke to him and he told me, I want you to come and work for the Institute and I want you to lead our reparations advocacy, that was hard to turn down. But really, both my intellectual work and myself just as a black man in the modern world, it's hard for me not to think about justice, but also thinking about black liberation, about black freedom, and how do we get there? And to me, reparations is part of that process. And so that's how I got to doing this work.
Excellent. Well, thank you, and great to see everybody. I was hoping there'd be little boxes of chocolate for Valentine's Day. But I did remember boxes to bring home, so it's interesting. Probably similarly, I wonder where to start and where the conversation begins. But as somebody who myself born in Jamaica and Jamaican parents and dad from New Zealand, and kind of seeing that conversation growing up around race constantly. And what looked like everywhere we lived. We lived, kind of all over the world in different places, then coming to the U.S. and kind of experiencing how that's different than it is in some other places. Always had me in a space where, either overtly or not so much, it was part of the conversation, as it is for everyone, I think. But for me then, growing up and being influenced by my parents and those around me, getting involved first in education, right, because I understand the importance of that and how important it is to talk about, everything that helps learn and grow, and whether learn from the past and make sure we try to make a better future. But then really exercising the ability to be in spaces to make decisions. I think that was another key piece, both in education and then here in public service. It was just an opportunity to say, what can you do to try and make the world a little bit better place, and specifically around this issue. And I think we've taken a lot of, we've heard a lot of comments in this space. I'll say this, when I became president of the New Jersey Education Association, representing over 200,000 educators, we were really intentional about saying we're a justice-centered union, and what that means. And it meant being in a lot of spaces where people would constantly say to us, well, why are you talking about that? Right? That's not learning to read, right? That's not math, right? And we would say, well, it's because for our students to be successful and for everyone to have that opportunity at the American dream that we all talk about, we've got to talk about all of these other things, right? And all of these other things include being in spaces talking about housing. It includes being in spaces talking about, yes, education, but it includes being in spaces talking about things like reparations. And I know that when we took positions in support of the bill that we saw and introduced, there was a lot of talk of again, why are you talking about reparations? How does this have to do with education? And we said, well, this is an issue that affects all of us, right? I think that's, everyone would agree with that. Many of you would agree with that as you sit here. So it's really through that lens that we really took a deep lean, and then through that, of course, using the position here as mayor to kind of raise awareness and certainly passing the resolution that we did, proclamation, and talking about the importance of supporting, at least looking at this issue. It's not that high a bar here, I don't think, but I think all that ties together of just trying to make that difference and understanding that if we're going to talk about moving people to a better place, we're going to have open and honest conversations. We're going to have to reflect on what the past has been, and we're going to have to look at and have the tough conversations moving forward to say, where do we go from here, and what does it mean to heal and to move forward together in some way that's productive. And that's really, I think, part of the focus.
Thank you, Reverend.
I know, not to be confused again in the future.
So is it okay if I stand up? Am I going to mess with the microphones if I stand up? Okay. This first part is going to sound a little bit like a sermon, so I have to be standing to share it. So there is a member of our congregation who found out some years back that his family had enslaved people, something that was allowed in the state of New Jersey, for many years. And this man has been doing his own work of reparation and reconciliation, but he's also gotten into the fight for reparations here in New Jersey and beyond. And he has a family Bible. He has a family Bible that has been passed down through the generations. And you open this family Bible through all of these sacred scriptures. The front, the Hebrew scriptures. The back, the Christian scriptures. You open to the center, and it's all of the family names. Right there in the split between the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. They're the family names of everyone who was a part of his family of origin, and the names of everyone that his family enslaved. Right there in the split, in the center of the sacred scripture passed down for generations through his family. There is a brokenness in every human body here in America, and there is a brokenness in our society, and it is shown in that split between those two sacred scriptures that should be whole, but are pressed aside and away from one another because there's slavery there in the middle. And until we rectify that brokenness, until we make the sacred scriptures whole, until we wrestle with the truth of the iniquity of white supremacy in this nation and the horrors that it has done, we will be perpetuating a lie, and we will be breaking the human family apart, anon and anon and anon. So our work in reparation is about healing that brokenness and letting the sacredness of who we are as a human family come back in relationship with one another. Great.
Thank you, Reverend Anya. Thank you all. And so what occurs to me is that I hear the word reparations often now, these days. And I do wonder, though, if people really, what people think when they hear that word. So maybe, Jean-Pierre, you can just tell us, what are reparations?
Sure, so I will start off in some ways a very basic, but I think fundamental way. We're going to start off with that venerable American institution, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. So first, in the dictionary, reparations is defined as repairing or keeping in repair. But also the second definition is the act of making amends, offering expiation, or giving satisfaction for a wrong or injury. But also something done or given as amends or satisfaction. And also something many of you are familiar with, the payment of damages. But I also want to go to a different definition. One from NAACP, a group of folks who've been organizing reparations for a long time here in the US, who define reparations as a process, and I'll say that again, a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights by governments and or corporations. It is a demand for justice, one that is rooted in international human rights law. And the last is I want to give you sort of the international standards for reparations, which are 5 points. The cessation or the ending of harms and the guarantee of the non-repetition of those harms, restitution, or putting folks, or attempting to put those people who are injured and harmed back to where they were before those harms occurred, right? And also repatriation, compensation, which many of you take as, and some folks properly understand as reparations, and it's satisfaction, right? All these elements are related in the sense that if those previous elements aren't sufficient, right, then we think about the folks who are injured. Does that meet what they think of as reparations? And then rehabilitation, which would take the form of legal, medical, psychological, and other care services. Now, floating in the ether there are also scholarly definitions of reparations. You can look at Sagni Darity, you can look at Ulufemi Taiwo, right? There are many scholars who define reparations and have different standards, right? There's an ongoing conversation. But I do think having that kind of fundamental basis allows us to begin to think about more in complex ways what forms reparations would take.
Great, thank you. Process, I think, is the takeaway for me there. And so, could you also just talk about, we're in New Jersey, so why should we care about this in New Jersey? Why do we need reparations in New Jersey?
Sure, so, maybe hopefully many of you are familiar with this story, and if you're not, this is a brief intro to that. I think, as a rhetorical question, for those of you that were raised and grew up in New Jersey, I just want to answer this question in your mind. If you went to public school in New Jersey, how many of you learned about slavery in New Jersey? And I'm not talking about slavery in the United States, I'm talking about slavery specifically in New Jersey.
No.
So right, very few, most likely, there's only one or two people who raise their hands, right? So for those of you who are not aware and did not learn that when you grew up, as one of the historians of slavery in New Jersey calls New Jersey the slave state of the North. And that's particularly important because slavery was not just incidental or random or something that happened in New Jersey as kind of on the margins. New Jersey was a slave society. Or put it another way, slavery was mainstream in New Jersey. So when New Jersey was founded as a colony, and when the British took over the colony from the Dutch, they incentivized slavery, basically creating a kind of bifurcation or two separate entities for providing property to those who had enslaved people, basically incentivized slavery in New Jersey. So New Jersey told, or really the British told folks who were coming to New Jersey, particularly from Barbados, if you bring your enslaved folks, we'll give you 150 acres of land for each enslaved person that you have. That way you can build up slavery in New Jersey. By 1830, of the enslaved population in the North, 2/3 of those folks resided in New Jersey. New Jersey was the last state in the North to get rid of slavery and to adopt the 13th Amendment. Right? It was the only state in the North to support the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. In Newark, the factories produced the uniforms for the Confederacy. All right. By the early to late 17th century, it became the primary form of labor. Right? And so slavery was not just some kind of marginal, small thing that could be located in a specific part of New Jersey. It was key to New Jersey's existence. And and one way to figure that out is New Jersey slave codes, which started in 1704, were more reflective of southern states than they were of states in New England or in the North. That gives you a sense of how dependent New Jersey was. They had to create a system to enforce this system because they knew they were so dependent upon that form of labor to keep the thing going. So, even when New Jersey ended slavery, right, and the U.S. abolished slavery, New Jersey engaged in Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, the early forms of sharecropping, right, all kinds of forms of racial domination and exclusion, right. Even as black populations came from the South for the Great Migration and the Second Great Migration, and then even after the ending of formalized segregation in New Jersey has 566 towns and municipalities, and why is that so? Why do we have local control? Why are there so many of these kind of local, principalities in some ways? This is directly related to segregation and slavery in New Jersey, right? The sort of configuration of white supremacy in New Jersey takes that kind of form. Right? New Jersey is, in some ways, kind of like a prime example of a suburban society. Right? Many books have been written to use New Jersey as an example of the rest of the country, to talk about suburbia and white flight, and particularly after the rebellion in Newark. And that leads to all kinds of forms of inequality. As many hopefully know through the Institute's work, New Jersey has one of the largest, if not the largest, racial wealth gap in the country, right? Over $300,000. And we can draw a direct line between slavery in New Jersey and to that racial wealth gap, and to other current day racial inequalities. And so that's why we need, reparations in New Jersey we'll get into, but that kind of brief history, that kind of story where we can talk about the 1660s in New Jersey, to the 2020s, slavery is always in there in some way, shape, or form. And so we need to reckon with that. As Reverend Anya beautifully put it, we need to come to terms with that as a state and as a country.
Thank you for drawing that direct line historically. And so, on the local level, maybe Reverend Anya can first talk about what people in Montclair have been doing, and of course she'll talk about the UU congregation as well, towards reparations.
Absolutely. So, and now I don't know where to begin, but so let me say first that there's an incredible effort going on in the town to, it was first to save, but now to preserve and to hold on to and to really celebrate the James Howe House. And if anyone in this room has been a part of that work, raise your hand and let's please celebrate these folks who have done this great work. The James Howe House is the first home in Montclair owned by an African American, someone who was enslaved by the Crane family. The Crane family is a family that built Montclair. And so when we rescue that history, when we put that history out for everyone to see and engage with, it's an opportunity for folks locally and hopefully beyond Montclair to reckon with the truth of slavery here in our midst and to see what we almost lost so many times by not paying attention to the gift here with us of the first home in town ever owned by an African American. So if you haven't ever looked at the Friends of the Howe House, look at the Friends of the Howe House, find them on the web and look up that work. It's really incredible. The other thing that I want to share is the congregation where Reverend Scott and I are proud to serve as co-ministers. The Unitarian-Universalist congregation here in Montclair is celebrating the 35-year anniversary of the Undoing Racism effort in the congregation. That's 35 years of paying attention to undoing racism, which doesn't seem like it is quite long enough because it should be about 400 years, right? But let's just say that we picked it up as soon as we were able to and the congregation was around. And because of that 35 years of history of doing that work, the congregation was very prepared when it came time to talk about reparation, and to make that be our focus area for our congregation's work. I say that because sometimes you have to get the groundwork done early before you can step into the more difficult work. Folks have been asking for reparations for 400 years. And we're still here at the table explaining what reparations is and why we should even pay attention to it. So any place, any institution that has done the groundwork for 35 years is more prepared, and there are probably some that are just beginning right now. But we're ready to move forward in Montclair, and I know that you will be speaking some about the petition that was passed. And I want to add that it has been an incredible honor to work on the Faith Allies for Reparations Task Force with Jean-Pierre and other faith leaders across New Jersey, and anyone who wants to get involved in that is welcome to. Find me after the event. We have been advocating statewide with the incredible campaign, Say the Word Reparations. because our leaders in the state were unwilling to even say the word reparations. And we've been advocating for a reparations task force here.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yes, so, Mayor Spiller, if you can just.
Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of it is the hope that the efforts translate into policies and actions that we can kind of jump off from. Because I think therein lies the pieces of it, as we, the great explanation of the history, and talk about the work that happens locally, and certainly, yes, as a local governing body, pass things to try and gain attention and to try and put that pressure on the higher-ups, if you will, in the legislature. But I think fundamentally, I would argue, why the reason they won't say it, I believe people do fundamentally understand what reparations means, right? And blankly, they're looking at that, it means a redistribution of wealth, right? It means the wealth that you have now and are enjoying and rely on, whether that be, and we can put it in so many ways, housing, all the different pieces that have come from it, and the systems that are in place that have continued racism and the system that was experienced before. It means undoing those, it means taking dollars from one location or one group and giving it to another. It means whether people are debating and discussing it's an actual dollar amount that's given, whether people are talking about it's in the conversations around housing, whether people are talking about conversations around healthcare, whether it's conversations around, it fundamentally is taking dollars that were gained and built based on a system of slavery and understanding and saying that because of that, we have got to put those dollars to another group of people who were the ones who did the work to get that to happen. And I think that's a conversation in a very progressive state. I'll put that broadly. In New Jersey, we're a pretty progressive state, but I think the fact that people don't want to say the word, the fact that we have a low bar ask, I think, which is put together a task force to talk about it, and you can't get that done. The fact that people are just reluctant to be in that space is because they realize that's a tough conversation, and unless you've done the work for a lot of years, and people can kind of come to terms with that and understand and be comfortable with it, it's always going to be a difficult conversation and a difficult place to move from. Everyone you talk to will say, absolutely, that was wrong, and New Jersey, we're not like that, and all those other pieces. To move that to a recognition of, well, we are still one of the most segregated states. Well, we do still have challenges by zip code, depending on, if you want to talk education or otherwise. We do still have concentrations of poverty. We do still have all of these things that you really haven't addressed in any way fundamentally. And every time you want to talk about it, you don't recognize the connection, and you find an excuse not to do it. I think it's really connecting those and getting people over that piece to say, well, what are we going to do about it now? Like well, what's the next step? How are we going to start to address some of these pieces more broadly? And I don't think that will be an easy conversation, but I think that's at the core of whatever the definition that we want to go from. I do think the legislators get it. I do think the general public kind of understands it, but I think they're very afraid of what that means. And I think that's the kind of next piece we have to push for.
And just to follow up, so you brought up the legislation, can you just explain for anyone who doesn't know the bill, well, not the bill, but the proclamation, I guess, that you.
Well, there's the bill at the state level, right?
Yes,
and multiple times introduced and still sitting there. And at the local level, though, we move forward to say that we support reparations. We say it, and we call on others to press the legislature to move, to pass the bill around reparations, to get the process going, to discuss and debate all the things of direct versus indirect compensation. I love, as was mentioned before, the work of just going through it is in a way a form of reparations, right? So we have really been supportive of that, and hopefully encouraging other towns to do it, but also putting the pressure on the legislators to maybe take some action around that. How effective that is, they certainly are mindful of it, but I think just as importantly or more importantly, whether it's in the marches that we do, right, and you're on the steps, or you're having the individual conversations with legislators, I think that's equally as effective, if not more, because they I think at least the supporters get a little bit of that wind, behind them, knowing that there's support for it there, even though, quite frankly, the leaders, right, the ones who, in our system anyway, whether it's a Senate president, a speaker, or otherwise, haven't moved on something, they know that there's still broad support at the citizenry level, or some support,
And can you just say if other towns have passed similar ordinances to?
Yeah, I don't know which towns have fully, there's a lot of them out there, which is something, but, the hope is that, when one does it, the next does it, the next does it. So that certainly was our goal, and we, asked the clerk to publicize that and get that out. But, we don't track how many others did it, but we hope that, again, that leads to a little bit of a swell of support energy.
I think I can come close to answering that, and Jean-Pierre, please help me. I think we were something like 17 towns and 2 counties?
20 municipalities. No.
20 municipalities, and if anyone in this room is from a town other than Montclair and wants to help getting that township to pass a proclamation, not a petition, in support of the Reparations Task Force Act, please speak to any one of us afterwards and we can help you with that.
Great, thank you. And so then that brings me back to the state level then. Jean-Pierre, maybe you can talk about what the New Jersey Reparations Council is doing and what you're seeing on the state level and what needs to happen on the state level.
Sure, no problem. So first, I want to take a small little detour. I can't help myself. We are in a library. Mayor Spiller talked about education. I'm a big fan of education like Mayor Spiller. And I just want to cite a particular, major figure who is also a big fan of education. Next week on the 23rd, next Friday, February 23rd, is the birthday of W.E.B. Du Bois. All right, and Du Bois was the first black person to receive a PhD from Harvard. And in his book, The Souls of Black Folks, which was published in 1903, Du Bois talks about his travels going to the South. Du Bois was born in Massachusetts, and he talks about going down to Atlanta and teaching in various parts of the South. And when he's on his travels, on the train, he gets repeatedly asked the same question, particularly from white people. How does it feel to be a problem? And his response in that text is, I answer seldom a word. Doesn't have the language to respond. And so many of the reports and analysis of black people in this country is from that kind of perspective. How do we take black people as a problem child? As a group of folks, as a problem, right? And earlier, Dionne had asked me about, the definition of reparations. I gave you this kind of baseline definition. At the council, we take a different approach from, other task forces for problematizing black people. There is a fundamental question animating our work, and I take this from our president and CEO, Ryan Hagelin. And that question, which is animating, how we think about reparations, is this really fundamental and key question. What does it take for black people to be free in New Jersey? That's a completely different set of questions, with a completely set of different answers, with a completely different vision. And the work of the council is thinking about reparations comprehensively, thinking about reparations through all the different manifestations of the harms of slavery, of the harms of Jim Crow, and the harms of current day institutional racism. And so we've got 9 committees. We've got a History of Slavery in New Jersey committee. We've got a Public Education and Narrative committee, a Segregation New Jersey committee. We also have Economic Justice, Environmental Justice, Health Equity, Public Safety. We've got all these committees, right? Part of the reason why, is that how deeply ingrained, right, these inequalities are. But we need to think about what kind of systems can we build? What kind of ways of organizing your society can we develop to repair those harms? And that's what's going to require a tremendous amount of work. But repair requires construction, requires building, requires thinking about, okay, these harms were put together by state law, local law, with the backing of federal law. Well, it's going to require new sets of policies, new ways of thinking, but it's also required massive investment. Right? MLK and the late attorney Randall Robinson called for a Marshall Plan for Black America. That was the extent of their imagination for thinking about the level of investment required. And that's how we need to think. We need to think big like that. And that's how our council is thinking. And so the work of the council is to produce a final report in June of 2025. that will serve as a blueprint for not only for New Jersey, but for the rest of the country. We're thinking about how to repair the harms of slavery. And that work is being done currently. There are public sessions being hosted by each committee. Just recently, the Health Equity hosted their last public session. You can go to njreparationscouncil.org. I'll repeat that again, njreparationscouncil.org to view all the previous sessions. Our next public session will be on April 17th, which will be hosted by the Public Safety and Justice Committee. We welcome public comment. You can have 3 minutes during the public session, provide public comment, but also on the website, if you want to express yourself in multiple ways, in prose or poetry, you can sing, however you want to express yourself about reparations, please go to njreparationscouncil.org, and you're not time limited, and our committees will view that. We have an upcoming public session in Newark on Juneteenth. That'll be at the NJPAC, Performing Arts Center. You'll have more details about that soon, but I'm excited about that. That will be in the evening. But the work of the council is really to think deeply about the process of reparations and thinking about the other side, right? What does it look like for Black people? And I'll leave you all with this about the council. And this is something that is reflective of the history of the United States. Because of the centrality of slavery to the U.S., the centrality of Jim Crow, the centrality of race, of ongoing institutional racism. As we've seen in the kind of brief moments, as Du Bois talks about in Black Reconstruction, when the slave went free briefly, stood a brief moment in the sun, and went back towards slavery. At those brief moments, when Black people were centered in this multiracial democracy, that had an impact on democratic governance and democracy for the rest of American society. And so when we Black people are free in this country, everyone is free.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Ariel now for Q&A.
Hi everybody, I'm Ariel Zeitlin. I'm one of the librarians here at Montclair Public Library. And I just want to thank you all for a really illuminating and thoughtful and detailed and inspiring conversation. We want to follow that up by with our Q&A with you all. But first I want to just give a shout out to the people who helped me put this together besides our wonderful participants, and that would be Wendy McNeil and the racism team, very enthusiastic right from the beginning, and Lori Beecham of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, an old dear friend. And also to, I'm not sure they're here tonight, but they lent their name to us and their support, and we value that deeply, the Montclair NAACP. I just want you to know that I personally will be in charge of putting together a pathfinder and reaching out to all of you after this session is over to make sure that you have resources to follow up on, and you'll find out, you'll get a written description of the upcoming events related to the New Jersey Reparations Council. So anyway, usually these guys have been so compact, I can't believe it. Usually I have to okay, we have to get to the Q&A. So who has a question for me? Okay.
I have two things. Do you have anything we can sign today to support your proclamation? You have all these people, you might as well take advantage of them. Is there anything to sign today?
Well, I'll say we passed it at the town level already, so I think it's forever noted if you're from any other town, like pushing them to sign the same thing, and we can certainly have a sample of it. If you know, I'll give you my info too. If you need me to send samples of anything, we can send that you can share with them to pass.
And let me just say that will be one of the links. It will be a link to the town's resolution, which you can use as a template for your own town's resolution.
The other thing is, I read a couple of years ago, that New Jersey was a favored place for the slave trade because it was cheaper tax-wise, I think, to import slaves into New Jersey than it was into New York City. So I didn't know if you didn't mention that, did you? I came a little late, but you didn't mention that, did you?
None of us mentioned that particular detail about, the tax incentives for slavery in New Jersey. I can't necessarily speak to that, but, that sounds, that's definitely a possibility.
It was a big, in New York City, it was a major stock market. It was a big emphasis in the stock market in New York City. If you, the Museum of the City of New York really went into that, the depth of it in New York City as well. Major, lots of money going into it, but New Jersey also was, part of the whole issue, the importation issue.
So I'm Ariel at the library, and you can just send me the link and I'll make sure everybody gets it. If you just send it to me, I'll try to do the backup so that everybody gets that information.
Hi, thank you, I appreciate all on the panel there. My family comes from Haiti too, my last name is Pierre, Jean. Like the whole reparation thing, it's not related to like Black Lives Matter, is it?
So I'll go first. That's an interesting question. I think, reparations is related to racial justice advocacy and Black liberation in many different kinds of ways, and the Movement for Black Lives has a wonderful primer and kit on reparations. And so I would say yes, it is. The folks who are involved in Black Lives Matter have thought about and deeply about reparations, and they've written useful resources about what reparations look like, particularly within international standards. And I think, one of the things that folks should keep in mind is that reparations is not like something that's marginal to the Black liberation movement, right? It's part and parcel. And I think sometimes it's been intellectually and then also in terms of advocacy ostracized, but it is fundamentally part of it. And folks who you think of as quote unquote civil rights activists have thought about reparations. MLK is one of those folks, right? He's been very deeply thinking about reparations. You can see this in his work, and you can see this in also other thinkers as well who are just sort of pigeonholed as civil rights thinkers, but they think deeply about issues around reparations. And so I think reparations has always been part and parcel, and to Reverend Anya's point, Black people have been, as they've been advocating for their liberation, they've been thinking about reparations for a long time.
Thank you, that's a really good question and a really good answer. I know someone here was...
Yes, I have two questions. First, do you think reparations should go to our brothers and sisters from the diaspora?
Sure, so I'll answer that question first. So for the council's approach is that reparations is for all Black people in the U.S. So we're seeking reparations for slavery in the U.S., slavery in New Jersey, Jim Crow in the U.S. and in New Jersey, segregation, and then also for ongoing institutional racism. And those, particularly Jim Crow and ongoing institutional racism, affected all Black people. Right? And so therefore the harms were not divvied up, depending on where folks came from, but based on race, and so therefore the repair should go to all Black people. That's our approach. But also, I just want to take a step back. The council has a kind of approach that's an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset. And so we think about how the harm was widespread, and therefore the repair should be widespread for Black folks.
And if I can just tie the two kind of previous question comment to this, I think it's all connected. Like the question before, is this tied to Black Lives Matter? Or it is, but it's also tied to all of the pushback that you see in so many other spaces as well, right? I think for me, what's always so striking is going down to the league municipalities every year and listening to, so many of the mayors and so many others, town by town, stand up at a microphone and say things that are completely contrary to a lot of the things that whether Black Lives Matter is pushing for, whether reparations are pushing for, whether those looking for affordable housing are pushing for. There is a pushback, and I think it's important to recognize that all of these things are connected, because oftentimes I find myself in spaces talking about not just reparations, but talking about issues of race. And people are very quick here in New Jersey to say, oh yeah, let's talk about Florida. Oh yeah, let's talk about some other state. And really it's, hey, let's talk about a town 2 towns over, right? Because we are, in a way, very segregated as we know, but we've got very diverse views from town to town, and to kind of get things across the line, there's pushback occurring in many spaces just a little bit away, just as much as there's a push to go forward. So I think all of these things are connected, both in the push and the pull.
Again, why do you think people from, from the diaspora deserve reparation when you haven't been through the atrocities that Black Americans have been through? When you guys, if you go through these atrocities, you can get up and go back to your homeland. You stated you have Jamaican backgrounds, you have Haitian backgrounds. Black Americans, we don't have nowhere to go. This is our homeland. So if you guys can take your reparations, you should go fight the French, the England for your reparations. So why do you think you're deserving of Black Americans' reparations?
Sure, so I'll respond. So part of the reason is, I think, just like Black Americans in the US, Black people in Haiti and Jamaica and throughout the Americas also came from the African continent, right? The country that they're going back to is not the original country from which they originated. They also came from the African continent, one. So I think that, I just want to make that distinction clear. But
excuse me, everyone is descendants from Africa. So, but what I'm saying is, again, everyone is descendants from Africa. So again, what I'm saying is, you guys, we all have, as Black people, have dealt with atrocities throughout the world. But I'm saying as far as the descendants of slaves here, so we can't do this reparations for all Black people because, like I said, you guys are immigrants. We are foundational to this land. We built this land. That's why we are foundational Black Americans and not African Americans. We all have African roots here. The first man is from Africa.
Sir.
So as far as people saying, go back to Africa, foundational Black Americans, we don't have no home in Africa.
Can you please sit
So
down,
therefore,
sir?
why do I have to sit down, ma'am? I'm asking a question.
You've already asked your question, and now we're about to answer it.
Why you
Please
cutting
sit
them
down.
off? Why you asking the man to sit down? Let him finish speaking his thought. That's our problem. We don't listen to each other.
okay, but
I'm sorry.
I just want to
Excuse
jump
me.
in just quickly because.
That's rude. You gonna ask him to sit down while he in the middle of speech?
All right, so I just want to jump in because I was actually speaking and responding, and then I was cut off so for the question to continue. So I just want to point that out. But I'll just say this: that we have an abundance mindset. I said before, not a scarcity one. I don't want to go now into the details about about history, about the movement of peoples back and forth across that national lines. I don't want to give a sort of historical breakdown. I don't want to do that in this space at this moment. But I do want to say that the council takes an abundance mindset, that the harms of slavery, the harms of Jim Crow, and the harms of ongoing institutional racism are what we're trying to repair at the council. And those harms affected all Black people in the US, right? And we want to repair, and part of reparations is that we're taking a future-oriented approach because we want to have a kind of world where the scarcity mindset, that there are limited resources for only a number of people. I think it's important to take this in mind, that the scarcity mindset is also a harm of slavery, right? And one of the harms of slavery is the system itself. And part of the system, however you want to describe it, is to represent it as this idea that there is only one small little pie, and that there is only a small amount to distribute amongst only a set amount of people, and if some people get some things, others won't get others things, and therefore people are being left out in the cold. That is not the approach that we're taking. We're taking the idea of constructing and building a new set of systems with a new set of values and priorities. One that won't take over from the old system that is itself a product of slavery, right? And so we need to think about it that way. And so that's the approach that we're taking at the council.
So,
And I just want to say to that as well, briefly though. We talked about it before, where reparations itself is a process, right? And I think that's an important thing that we all have to go through. It's not just some people, we all have to go through. And I think when you define what it looks like at the end, and I think that's open for discussion. When you talk about someone being impacted by a system of racism right here in the United States, there are solutions to that, opportunities for that, whether that's in education, higher education, other places. Everyone should have access to that conversation and see what that looks like. And I agree fully, it's not well, we've got to limit it down, and how far do you want to limit it, and other pieces. This is something that affects each and every one of us, by the way, and I think that as people who've gone through a system, being here in the United States, we are talking about breaking those systems down. We are talking about making people whole from those systems. We're talking about trying to undo harm because of those things. And all of that, I think, is part of the conversation. And I think it's less effective if we start to silo and say, well, this is what I think should happen, and this is more limited than what you think should happen.
So
Can I
I
make a
would just,
statement? I'm sorry.
I would
Can I make a
just,
statement? I'm
excuse
sorry.
me,
Can I make a statement?
just a
There
minute,
is
please.
nothing, I'm gonna walk out of here. There's nothing, there's no amount of money. I don't care what dollar sign you put on it. You talk about reparations and trying to mend what was done to our people. There's not a dollar sign that you can put on bringing back or making right what was wrong. The travesty we've been through, unimaginable.
So,
And this is what we lived through for so long, generations to generation to generations. I still feel the pain. My children feel the pain. I'm done, man. The bottom line is, let's not waste time here. Reparations, we've been talking about this for a long time. We done talking. People have been paid, other races have been paid, and
Still getting paid.
and so forth.
Still getting
They
paid.
should have been did that for us. So let's make it happen immediately. But still, the dollar sign don't matter. Because you can't give money, money don't change everything. You can't bring back the loss of life. Our babies, innocent people being hung from trees, heads severed, body dismemberment, body parts. You can't get that back. What is done, what happened, you can't undo what was done.
So what we gonna do for it?
What we gonna do for it?
Forward.
Forward? Forward is recognizing that we are not here as race. Bob Marley said, hold on a second, one second. He said it's a rat race. Watch the rats. They eat and gnaw at each other. Watch how they move around. The human race, the human people, were not supposed to be living this way. It should have never been a place where another man says, you must do what I say. God gave us the earth, all of us. God created all of us. We are all brothers and sisters. God gave us all the earth. There's not a man over no other man. And so when we got to that point where a man says that I control these group of men, that's when we went wrong. So if that's what we're going to continue, then we're wasting our time right now.
okay,
But if we say there's no more of that, and that's where we go forward, then let's go forward with that. Because that's the only way we're going to go forward. That's the only way we're going to go forward.
And can we pause for a second and just say that we heard you,
yes.
we hear you.
I just want to say that I apologize for asking you to sit down. I worry as a librarian, I try to make sure everybody gets their say, but the things that both of you have shared are really important. They're from the heart, and they go to the heart of this issue. And, my desire to tie things up into a neat and tidy bow is not always possible when we're talking about such an impassioned issue and such a critically important one. So I want to thank you for coming here, speaking your truth, sharing your heart with us, and I also want to make sure that everybody else gets a chance to ask their questions and share their truth as well.
And I want to say I love each and every one of you in this room.
So, I have a question about the nature of the immigrant, okay? And whether that impacts what goes forward, what goes into the conversation. And that goes to me of everybody, because there's only if I can not movie quote, but either you were indigenous to this country, you were brought over by this country, or you migrated to this country. That's it. Those are the only three ways that we're here. But for hundreds of years, some of us have been here as immigrants. For hundreds of years, some of us have been here as being brought over. And for thousands of years, some of us were the indigenous population. So in looking at that as a whole, how does those feelings of the immigrant thought of, like I just came here, I didn't start this. This was how I found this place, I'm just a part of this now. And do you see that at all in your conversations with others?
I wonder if I might begin, but I know that I'm not the last word on this. I want to speak from my perspective as someone who has worked with the challenge of white supremacy in myself and in my world. When Jean-Pierre said, when he spoke about W.E.B. Du Bois, and he said, and Du Bois was really struggling with the number of people that came to him and said, how does it feel to be the problem? Du Bois is not the problem. The African American that has been here since slavery is not the problem. The indigenous American is not the problem. The person who has been an immigrant and from Haiti, they are not the problem. The problem is white supremacy. And white supremacy is here and now, and anyone with skin like mine participates in it and gains from it. Whether I came here last week, or whether I grew up in this country, or my parents were on the Mayflower. I gain from it. So I take that lens looking at how we all participate in this system of harm. I gain from it every single day, no matter how long I've lived here. And people have suffered from it every single day, no matter how long they have lived here. In different ways, in different forms, of course, but it's here and now. Racism and white supremacy are here and now.
Yes.
Thank you, Reverend Anya.
First, I want to thank each of you for being here. This is a very important topic, and as we heard, it's very passionate to many people because either they lived it or it's something that they care deeply about. I have a question, and the question is, what is the next step? And the reason I ask is, and I'm speaking as the chair of the NAACP State Conference Economic Development chairperson, where I have to go across the state, and I think about legislators and reparations. I'm familiar with the council and know many people on the council, and the challenges that I'm going to have to face to learn the different nuances of these 500 so different municipalities. And I'm thinking about strategy and partnerships and next steps, and locally I've made some headway in some issues around housing and things like that. But from your point of view, Reverend Anya, or anyone, what is the next step locally? And I'm familiar with the state legislature as well. But what is the next step locally?
Question.
I'm glad to begin, but I think I certainly don't have the last word on this one. One of the things that's so important for us to pay attention to always is the budget. The budget in the town, the budget in every town. And the reason I say that is because if we move forward on the work for reparations, we're going to have to follow the budgets, the economic development. I'm sure you'll be looking at budgets to make sure that our towns can live into the expectations put forward to do the work of repair. So looking at those budgets now makes a whole lot of sense and seeing where they fall short, so we can be prepared for that.
And maybe I'll just transition it over. I think that's exactly right. I don't think it's a singular thing. Like I know that waiting for a report to come out and some bigger, broader pieces, no question. But I think there are absolutely just the steps that happen along the way, because I think all of them address this, and a lot of it, as I mentioned before, it's about money, right? A lot of this is about money, right? So whether it's at the local level, state level, whatever level we're talking about, when you're talking about things that address some of the systemic racism that exists today, I'm glad you really answered it that way, it exists today, all right, what are we doing at each level to try and address that? Whether it's around housing, whether it's around education, whether it's around, any single thing, like where's the money going in to try and combat that? And if you move the needle a little bit, you're doing something, right? So I think many in this space are involved in something in those areas that we consider justice-centered, right? And as we're moving that, that is moving that needle. And then, of course, there are moments, I think, where there will be pressure points for some bigger moves. And then, of course, I think we all coalesce behind that, but there are things we do each and every day.
So thank you for your question. What I would say to you, since you're obviously already aware of a lot of the legislative and the council's efforts, is in the meantime, while you're waiting for the final report to come out, is I think part of what we're here in the library is people learn from stories, and I see my comms director Lori Bisham in the audience, and I think people learn from stories, and I think one of the things that we're obligated to do, both as folks living here in New Jersey and people in the U.S., is to re-narrate the history of New Jersey, to tell people the story about slavery in New Jersey and how it impacts their lives today, and about how reparations is a solution to that. That reparations is a winning message, that it's key to a New Jersey, and that it can have a positive impact on their lives, on all the folks that, and particularly Black people. And if you can retell that story in a way that folks can identify with, that humanizes it, that's important work, and that's going to take a lot of work. But that story needs to be told over and over and over again, to the point where it just becomes just as mainstream as slavery was in New Jersey when it was happening.
Hi. Given that law and policy supported white supremacy for so long, it's clear that laws and policies have to change. But I'm concerned that sometimes there's de facto practices that avoid the law and policy. Can anybody speak to the efforts that any of you are aware of to change the culture so that people embrace the new laws and policies that we hope to pass?
Yeah, I think that I'll answer it from an organizational perspective and talk about educators. I think education is always key. I can say that as an educator, right? So a little biased, but I think education is always a huge piece of it. Having the conversations, people sharing stories, but also really being intentional about making sure we all can kind of understand our role in systems, especially because in your question a little bit, I'll share. Like I think it kind of concedes that this is something of the past, or no, these are systems happening like right now, and I appreciate we've got to kind of have all the conversations, but we should realize that we still have to change the systems in many ways, right? They're still doing the work, still doing the harm, right? So I think it is having those conversations so people see it, for what it is and understand that. I think it's having conversations in ways that don't put people out of the conversation, don't immediately put them on guard saying, wait a minute, that's constantly what happens when people say, hey, I don't want to talk about this if it means you're calling me a racist or it means, I'm part of something, but hey, we all are, right? I think you said we all are. So, how do we talk about those things? How do we make it a conversation that is, we're more fluent in it, we constantly are able to recognize it and speak about it. The more we do that, I think we can do both. We can work on policies that change systems, and then we can also talk about the other pieces surrounding those policies that maybe will still exist for a long time after.
Thank you. That's a good answer. Good questions.
Hello, good evening. I just wanted to ask you a question. I am a younger millennial, and I actually have two questions. My first question is about, if you guys do about California's task force. I've been watching them. I think they've been doing an extremely good job. The only thing I would say about this that differs is you guys are saying it's a Black thing when there was a specific group that was harmed, which are African Americans, Black Americans, the American freedmen. When they got emancipated, it wasn't a global thing. And I know I've been hearing a lot of people talk about white supremacy. Well, white supremacy is a global thing, and I feel like it's a burden on Black Americans when we try to tell us to fight this amongst each other here in America. It is a global thing, not a United States thing. And to put that in our reparations, when it's literally just a debt that's owed to a specific group, just like the Japanese reparations, if you guys are not aware about those. And it wasn't all Japanese people, it was a specific group that was interned in camps in the United States government. And I just want to say, the United States sanctioned slavery against my people, the African Americans, Black Americans, American freedmen, which means that that should be owned directly to them. And as well, can we also include direct cash payments? And my last question would be about outreach and what you guys would expect for the youth to get involved with, because I feel like our voices do matter, and I feel like we have a lot to impact.
So we do have a lot to ask and a lot to add, but we can really only handle one question at a time because other people have to have a chance to ask questions as well.
I do want to address, I can address all three quickly. Third, the youth, yes, I do want young people involved. I'm working with some folks in New York who are part of a national organization called Get Free Together, who do trainings for young people. I'm hoping to get them to do a training in New Jersey for young people. So if you just reach out to me through my email if you want to participate, that will hopefully be in the spring at some point. The second question, yes, cash payments to individuals are part of our, the economic justice team on the council are considering cash payments. And then also to California about how they restricted eligibility. I would encourage you to look at the recommendations that they came up with, and then look at the relationship between the restrictions and eligibility, and if those restrictions have any impact on what they actually came up with in terms of recommendations. Because eligibility, from what I've seen so far in recommendations, have zero impact on what they've come up with. And then I would also just say this, and we're in the library. I just can't help myself. I'm sorry. I love education. One of the leading political scientists in this country, by the name of Michael Dawson, has written about reparations for Black people in this country. Robert G.G. Kelly, one of the leading historians of Black people in this country, has written about slavery, reparations for Black people in this country. And both of them point out, when Black people have organized for reparations, it has not been simply about that cash. It has always been centered around freedom. Okay? I just want to point that out. That's incredibly important. That's not me saying this. Those are highly respected scholars looking at.
We live in an economical system.
I just want to point that out. Also, one of the harms of slavery is capitalism. It emerges with slavery, right? And this kind of commodification, this kind of idea that cash represents the only form of freedom is itself a reflection of a particular kind of economic system that is deeply intertwined with slavery. And it's about exploitation, exclusion, marginalization. Right? So when you think about different kinds of economic systems and possibility or reorganize, I just want to leave that there. I go into further about some of the issues but I don't want to do that. So I'll just leave it for more questions.
Okay, so we have two more questions left. And one of them is going to be our camera guy, who's done a lot of these, but he's never asked to ask a question.
So really quick, I'm a filmmaker and I write screenplays, and so one of the principles of story is you have to know what the end is. If you don't know the end, your story wanders and you're just looking for a place for it to go. So the end, where you want your story to be, what you want it to look like, is important. So my question is, with reparations in place, what is that vision? What does it look like when you have reparations enacted in that perfect world? What does it look like? What is that? What is that about? Sorry.
It's never going to be a perfect world,
Right.
but
So I'd like to begin by lifting up what the scholar who spoke from the far back shared about this harm is never going to be completely gone. So the reason I want to lift that up is to say that repair, the work of repair, isn't going to heal all wounds. That can't be the end goal because there's too much brokenness to get to a place where that disappears. But repair is moving towards greater equity, greater freedom, greater, from a spiritual perspective, where the soul of our nation is not torn asunder, where we have rectified by looking directly at the sin of white supremacy and our racist truth.
And I'll just emphasize again, I think that as we talk about the individual, and we talk about the harm that is think if we are not fundamentally changing those systems throughout that process, we are leaving in place a huge piece that just continues to do harm and will keep us in a place where we are just on the margins, right? We have to change systems. When we talk about equity, I think we look at a place where we all have that ability to succeed and prosper here, but do so without the barriers and challenges that are either very apparent or oftentimes more hidden. That's got to be part of it.
And I'll just say this first, thank you so much for that question. Because when I do these talks, I wish more and more people ask me that question as the most urgent and important question. That is the question, to have a vision for what is on the other side.
Yeah.
And I think we are so used to living in a world in which Black people are unfree, that we have such difficulty imagining the possibility that Black people actually could be free.
Yes.
And so we're asking folks who are living in this kind of situation to imagine this kind of completely different kind of world. And so we're against all these obstacles. But I actually do think the purpose of reparations, right? The harms of slavery, the harms of Jim Crow, the harms of white supremacy and capitalism are man-made, right? Don't ever forget that. The part of power is in its most subtle form is to give you the sense that you can't fight against it, right? But if it's man-made, it obviously can be changed. Things were different before this, so that means that things can be different after this. And so, what does after mean? I'm not going to give you a full-floated, answer, but I can say what it means is Black freedom, right? That means it's different from how we're living here. The way in which we're interacting, the way in which we're being, right? Just as if you were to tell people about the world of slavery before it happened, they will look at you like you're crazy, right? And so the world that we need to imagine is completely very different than the world we're living in now, right? And that takes a lot of work, it's going to take a lot of time, but that's what's on the other side.